middle managers are really central to really the success of creating a more diverse and inclusive organization. I mean, I think they're a linchpin in a lot of ways.
Hello to you, and welcome back to Relationships at Work, a leadership guide helping you build workplace connection, improve culture, and avoid blind spots. I'm Russel, the host, communications and leadership expert as well. Couple of successful decades in both those areas, and a whole heap of curiosity, just like you, on how we can make the workplace a better place. And no matter where your culture is, it always can be better. There's always an opportunity to grow, to advance. Always a way to do that. One of the best ways we can do this is through DEI. Now, there's a lot of people that might cringe with that phrase, and unfortunately, DEI has been vilified. That acronym has just been hated and hated and hated. The funny thing is, if you actually break it into diversity, equity, inclusivity, it's hard to argue that those are essential to the health of our organizations, to our leadership, to move forward. That's where the great ideas come from. That's where new perspectives come from. That's where innovation comes from. So if we want to make our organizations healthier, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusivity, are the ways in which we do it. Now, my guest today is going to talk about an area of our organization that might be the catalyst for that growth. Our middle managers, those that are in the center of it all, and may have a lot more influence than they may realize, or we may realize. A lot of influence. So it's a very important area to invest in, to drive change through. And my guest today is going to talk all about that. So why am I rambling on about it? I'm going to go talk to him right now so we can share the knowledge. Hold on. And on the show today, we have Jonathan Njus, and here is why he is awesome. He's the program lead for expanding equity and director of family economic security at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. He's responsible for the strategic direction and day-to-day management of the foundation's multi-million-dollar, multi-year initiative that has grown to 200 plus companies and 1,000 plus leaders. That's a lot of pluses, who are actively engaged in making their organizations more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I'm being very slow on that, considering the focus on DEI in the workplace these days. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Russell.
Middle managers, DEI, important area to focus on within organizations because we seem to focus on HR and we seem to focus on executives. So I'm super curious about this from a relationship standpoint. But before we get into any of that, Jonathan, we have to start with the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience, sir?
Yeah, I love this question. It was great to think back on it. And I'm going to go with the best. And like you noted in earlier episodes, it's earlier on in my career. And so it was one of my first jobs coming out of college. Just a little bit about me. I grew up in Michigan. I still live in Michigan, in a rural part of Michigan, predominantly white, kind of middle class upbringing. My first job was actually in Washington, D.C. I worked for the National Council of La Raza, which is a Hispanic civil rights organization. And one of my memories from that time is being in a staff meeting and looking around and being the only. This is the first time I'd ever experienced that in my life. But despite that fact, I felt so seen and appreciated for who I was, Jonathan, in a way that I hadn't really felt before in my life. And it was an amazing feeling. You feel part, like, you organizations throw this out to really feel like you're a part of a family. And yeah, I've got lifelong friends from that time. Best man at my wedding. We shared an office together. And the other part of that was I had the best boss. And shout out to Sonia Perez, wherever she is. I mean, so sharp, so kind. Just that's such a perfect combination of leader. And I felt like she just really cared about me as a person, first and foremost, and just invested a lot of time in me, made me a much better writer, which I've been able to take throughout my career. and just really learned a lot from her and how she showed up. Just so consistent, so professional, and obviously very effective in her job. So that would be my best experience so far.
That sounds amazing. And I like that you put so far. You're hopeful. I appreciate that. And to your point, when I ask this question, it's always from decades ago because it's
Yeah.
really been that impactful piece that people have taken with them throughout their careers, whether it's still within corporate or it's entrepreneurship, but it was sort of set the standard, good or bad. Sadly, it's usually bad.
Right.
I want to go back a bit to what you said about being sort of this other within
Yeah.
the organization a bit, which is different usually for white males, not the norm. Having said that, I'm kind of curious, besides the importance of that touchstone of your direct boss, the direct person you
Yeah.
relate to, that's which is so important in all those inclusive feeling belonging. What was it that the larger organization you felt did to make you feel that you, for quote unquote, lack of a better term, family, because as much as we all hate that now, that it made you feel that, which is obviously the good thing.
Yeah, I think there were just a lot of gatherings and events, and there was always we were doing things outside of the workplace. We had sports clubs and celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and those type of things. Like that type of effect was it. That was the atmosphere. That was that was the environment. So the food, the music, and everything else, like it had that type of feel. And the other thing is it wasn't about me as a worker, it was about me as a person. I just felt that that pervaded the organization. And so that's what I said, when I said earlier, like I felt like I was really seen,
Mhm.
like that, because they're seeing me as like as a person kind of beyond the identity. And that was the beauty of it, just to realize like, okay, different race, different gender, et cetera, et cetera. The commonality I had with different people in different ways, and also obviously the differences. I think that was what made it such a wonderful culture to be a part of.
Feels more like community, I would almost say, even though like
Yeah.
family kind of gets that well, family doesn't fire people. But the community does feel a little bit more the humanity of it as well. Yeah. Anyway, I
And I
like from humanity.
yeah, and I
Sorry.
wonder, like, looking back, I was so early in my career, obviously, I wasn't managing anyone.
Mhm.
I do wonder if what type of training Sonia got. Like, in, like, those type of conversations. I mean, on some level, it might be natural, but on another level, it might be I would think it'd be planned knowing I've been in a management position since then.
Sure.
I'm sure we're gonna talk more about that, but I'm curious, like, how did they create that culture as managers? Because because that's such an important part of it.
Well, let's dig a little deeper into understanding all this inclusivity and
Sounds good.
diversity we're talking about. So, I mean, I understand the crazy amounts of focus on this in the larger conversation
Yeah,
these days,
for sure.
globally, not just the US. What Let's define it first.
Okay.
What is DEI to you as it pertains to the workplace?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I where I would start is I think obviously there's been a lot of pushback on DEI recently, but I think there's an opening opportunity to actually define what it is. We tend to throw out acronyms in the workplace and larger society, and you and I were talking earlier, we don't define them. So for me, diversity is about opportunity. It's making sure that everyone has a fair shot at a good job in the company, getting in or moving up. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. So, and I think it's a broader definition of diversity. And I think every company can take a look at picture of its organization and see who's in and who's out. There are holes and gaps in every organization. Could be by race, could be by gender, but let's bring in other types of diversity. Could be disability. That's something we do not talk enough about, the lack of diversity on in terms of workers with disabilities. Veterans. Another one that what about first generation workers? We talk about first generation workers that go to college. What about first generation workers they get into these organizations and these companies. That's a whole nother realm. So I think that, and that's going to vary by organization. So diversity is about opportunity. Equity to me is about fairness. So, treating everybody fairly during the hiring process, during the promotion process, but also when you're on a team, everyone's treated fairly and equally. And then inclusion is about respect. How are we respecting everyone, no matter their identity, no matter their background and experience? And these values, opportunity, fairness, and respect, these are, I was going to say American values, but I'm talking with a Canadian. I think these are like human values. And so I think we've got to have that conversation. And really, in a lot of ways, these are values a lot of organizations want. This is who we are. This is who we're going to be. So that's how I define diversity, equity, inclusion.
Well, it's funny you say that because, I mean, they sound great. These are great things. These are things that we absolutely should do. And yet, everybody's fighting back at the whole idea of the DEI notion. It's this thing that's taken on this, like the term woke, right? It started with the best of intentions. It started with the idea of being awake and noticing all the things that are not working and the things we really need to address. And this thing has shifted politically, all these other things. And DEI has kind of gone in that path as well. Why do people have such a problem with this thing? Hey, if you're enjoying the insights from our guests, you'll love our Raw Notes newsletter. It's packed with guest takeaways, the resources that inspire them, and my own tips on how we as leaders can be better humans for the humans that we're responsible for. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and subscribe now and help the workplace be more human.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been reading the headlines like these companies are pulling back, those companies are doubling down. I think the full story is a lot more complex than the one we're reading in the news. I'm sure some companies are abandoning it, but I think most companies are evolving it. They're really deepening their efforts. And so what we see with expanding equity, we have a network of almost 300 companies now, over 1,000 leaders that are working to make their organizations to have more opportunity and fairness and respect. We had our largest cohort in February, 50 organizations, over 100 leaders. So there's that story that, isn't being told necessarily. But yeah, I mean, there's some reframing. I'd say that more than retreating. And quite honestly, this work needed to evolve, and it was in the process of evolving. So I just talked about like how we defining DEI. We've got to speak in a language that people understand, both inside our organizations and outside our organizations. So I think this is kind of a natural development. And what we found in our network is that there was evolving before the new administration and the pushback and everything else. We did a retrospective on the first 3 years of the program, and we discovered that the vast majority were anchoring on inclusion and belonging. Almost 100% had implemented at least one initiative in that space. So we were seeing these trends before the political change in the US. I think the other thing that's happening is that organizations are focusing on the front line. They're focusing on the people. So you'll hear, I don't know if you've seen that or heard that, but it's like people first. It's about our people. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that focus. I don't think that's necessarily, I mean, probably in part it is a reframing, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there. What we found is like the more companies are talking with their front line, for example, the more that they're learning about what their needs are. For example, not necessarily higher pay, although that's always welcome, but I need more paid leave, or I need more flexible scheduling or whatever else. So I think that connection with the front line, and as we know, there's a huge gap between the frontline workers and senior leaders in terms of inclusion. And so a lot more inclusive leadership programs, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. The last two things I'll say, I think we're seeing more increased collaboration across organizations. That needed to happen too. It's not a side project. It's not an HR project. How is it integrated across? Because everyone has a hand in making the organization more diverse and equitable and inclusive. So a lot more conversation with legal and communications and procurement investment. And so I think embedding that, integrating that across the organization, then embedding it into the strategy, because at the end of the day, why people are continuing to do this is because it's good for business. I mean, there's been every opportunity to like pull back and get out, but a lot of these organizations are keep doing it because it's good for their bottom line. It's good for their workforce. It helps with retention and everything else. So that's what we've seen in our network.
So I'm going to kick the tires a bit here, Jonathan.
Sure.
One of the things I hear a lot when I talk to those around DEI is two things. And you brought up one of them now. One is it shouldn't be a separate program. It should be part of the DNA.
Yeah.
Except you're a program lead for expanding equity. So technically you are part of a program that is separate, that is focused on this. Also, DEI should not be talked about by people of color. Like, it should not be only people of color, because that's what it seems to be, is like, oh,
yeah,
you're a person of color. You should be leading this because you're the quote unquote face of it.
Yeah.
I love the fact that, well, you're not.
Yeah.
For those that are not watching this
Right.
on video. So I see that sort of, you're also a program, but it's also really nice that you're not the go-to executive points a finger to because they're not imaginative enough or they're not inclusive enough themselves, that they're feeling like it's somebody else's problem, not what they see in the mirror.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile, or how do you think that way?
Yeah. I mean, that's an extremely important point. We saw that in our research when we look back on the first 3 years of the program. Senior leader buy-in and commitment and all the things is extremely important. I think that's very important now, especially when you start, when it becomes more headwinds versus tailwinds, that's where you really need leadership to step in and step up. So I just want to note that. I think that's extremely important. It takes time to integrate this type of work across an organization. It's taken us time as the Kellogg Foundation. I mean, we've been on a journey for a while and focused on equity and diversity and inclusion. And so just as an example, and so it's pervaded our programming and our operations and everything else. Just to give you an example, I mean, this program, Expanding Equity, started in the investments office as a pilot project. So this wasn't like a side project. It was started as a learning journey, because we're all on this journey of trying to figure out how to relate better. I mean, I love the title of your podcast, how we relate better with people that we work with, and the thing is, the workplace is the one place where we're actually interacting with people who are different from us. And so it's not like some people haven't had that opportunity. I fortunately have. I talked about at the beginning of this podcast. But how do you do that effectively? And so that takes some time to figure out. And so it really started there in an organization. And that's where I think you talked about, okay, me as a white man and a middle manager. Mm-hmm. I'll add that to the definition. There have to I think this is an opening opportunity. How can organizations have open, honest conversations with middle management, starting from scratch on some level, where it's not here's something else to do, but why is this good for the business? Why is this good for me? And then what do I think? What do I recommend, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think bringing in middle management, a lot of whom are white men, or into the conversation, into the work on the front end.
Why are middle managers, to getting to our topic today, why do you think middle managers are uniquely positioned to impact DEI outcomes, good or bad?
Yeah. I mean, I think middle managers are really central to really the success of creating a more diverse and inclusive organization. I mean, I think they're a linchpin in a lot of ways. I mean, I know you love definitions, so let's start with a definition. Middle manager, somebody who manages people who sit below them and managers who sit above them. They're really in the middle of the organization, leading teams and projects, and they're in the middle of it all. I mean, and so I think they're really key for a few reasons. So I think number one would be they're engaged in the hiring process. It's usually a team that does it, but if they're going to be on my team, I'm going to be involved in that hiring process in some way. So how are we sourcing candidates? What are going beyond my LinkedIn or everyone's LinkedIn? What are the search firms that are helping, out with that so that we make sure that we get a diverse candidate pool on the front end of the process as they go through the hiring process. And I'm going to be interviewing, et cetera, et cetera. So like the hiring process, I think is number one. Number two would be performance reviews. So how you're doing performance reviews. I mean, are you being objective? Are you being fair? Is this about your performance and not your personality? That can be an issue sometimes. That's where bias creeps into some of this work. So how are you being fair there? That's going to really have a tremendous impact on who moves up and who doesn't. So performance reviews. The last thing I would say is, sure, we'll spend some more time here. I mean, the culture of your team. I mean, this is maybe one of the most important relationships you have in your organization, whether you're happy there or not, is the relationship you have with your boss. And so you're going to dictate what type of culture that team has. Like, do you feel, as I was saying earlier, do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Do you feel welcomed and respected? That's going to dictate, whether you stay or whether you leave, and maybe even whether you come, because they hear about organizations and of what they are in terms of culture. So I just feel like middle managers are in the middle of it all. And so that behooves leaders that are focused on diversity or equity inclusion or how to bring that about in their organization to really be talking and working with middle managers early on in the process and throughout the process.
Want more from our conversations on the show? Subscribe to the Raw Notes newsletter. It's where I share top takeaways from our guests, the resources that fuel their success, and my personal insights on how we as leaders can be more human. And we need more human. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and sign up today to keep your leadership journey on the right path. What do you mean when you mean success? So at the beginning, you were talking about the idea was that we will engage middle managers to be successful in DEI. Great. What is success in DEI?
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good question. I'm really, professionally and personally, really interested in this conversation about how leaders show up in organizations. One of the great things that we've done at our organization, at the Kellogg Foundation, is we don't evaluate, and this is all staff, on just the what. So the what is your job description, your roles and your responsibilities, and all of those things. We also evaluate staff on the how they're showing up. And we actually have a 2-pager, like qualities that we look for in Kellogg Foundation staff. And that to me is like, I think was such progress. So you ask about success. I think for me, it's how middle managers, senior leaders, frontline supervisors are treating their staff, but really how are they kind of showing up the kind of day to day in and out. And that is so hugely important to culture. And like really in terms of like, it may sound soft in a lot of ways, but there's really a business case to be made for it. I mean, 39% are likely to turn down a job opportunity due to perceived lack of inclusion. 50% reduced risk of turnover when workers report feelings of belonging. 79% of employees who claim that a major reason for leaving their job is a lack of appreciation. These things matter to the bottom line, but you've got to start from that place of like, okay, how are our leaders showing up day in and day out with our team? So for me, success is you're going to see those numbers go down over time. You can measure that. I mean, there are inclusion surveys and you can close the gap. I think you're going to see a reduction in turnover and an increase in production, but it's going to be caused by your leaders showing up better day to day.
I love that we always try to shift, and I've done it myself too, where we shift like, well, it might be a little soft. Anybody listening that has a problem with soft things is part of the problem.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, part of it, I kind of prepping for this, like there's a business case to be made for this,
Sure.
but there's a human case to be made for this. Like how are we in the workplace? We need each other as human beings. Like they're like feeling that connection, being in that relationship. I mean, that's hugely important. I mean, one of the things that I've enjoyed reading is the Harvard study on adult development. And the 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 quote there is the good life is built with good relationships. And the happiest people have the best relationships. And part of that is relationships at work. It's relationships with coworkers, it's relationships with bosses. And if you have good relationships, you're happier, you're healthier. Yes, the business is going to benefit from that, but you are as a human being. So anyway, I agree wholeheartedly, Russell. Like it's good for you. And we don't make that case enough when we're having those conversations with leaders across organizations.
Well, that goes to the point that quote unquote leaders shouldn't have to be sold the human side of business, or they wouldn't be leaders, they're managers to that point.
There you
So
go.
on the flip side of that, I want to talk about your work, because you're going in and you're working with middle managers to try to get them to buy
Yeah.
into DEI and their leaders. So what do you tell? So I'm a middle manager. I'm trying to understand how to prepare myself to be better in diversity,
Yep.
equity, inclusivity, belonging. What are you telling them that their own self-work should look like to understand DEI efforts?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, I would say you've got to start with yourself. So I think you've got to do your own work as a leader. And so we all have biases and a lot of that comes from the messages, the images like we see growing up and throughout. And so we all have thoughts about others. And so like you've got to focus on that. Like and investigate that. Where might I have some prejudices or some judgments about other people? And that's your starting point, and you've got to work on that and changing those thoughts, which will change your kind of feelings and your actions. And then I think, what's important is how you show up with your team. So as I've talked about earlier, I think, and one thing that I've really appreciated is thinking about my 50% and their 50%. I focus on my 50% and what I can control. I think a lot of times we're trying to control their 50%. And so kind of giving them space to be who they are and do what they do. I think another thing, it's not just words, it's also like your tone and your body language matters and in how you're showing up as a middle manager. I think we've all seen that stat. When you're talking with someone, it's 7% words, but it's 38% tone, it's 55% body language. So having that, I think that's really important in how you're showing up. So that's where I would start, is like how you're showing up as a leader. And then, I think kind of continuing that. I mean, we can dive deeper if you want. Like there are moments that matter like within an organization. And so you got to pay attention to that. So I'm showing up in a certain way, I think consistently, intentionally. I think you've got it. That's really key too, is the kind of moments that matter. Your one-on-ones, your group conversations, maybe something critical has happened at the organization or in society. Those are important times as well. So we can dive deeper there.
Yeah, I mean, to the point, vulnerability comes up for me a lot because if a manager, middle manager is self-reflecting and they're coming up with all these biases, there's some shame that comes with that too, as they're recognizing that they don't have the right answers or they've been carrying themselves in the wrong way for a while.
Yeah.
A perfect example of this was I had a middle manager reach out to me after the George Floyd murder, and it was the fight between all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. Now, this person came up to me and said, I didn't know the difference. I didn't know that it was wrong to say all lives matter. I didn't get it. I was saying it over and over again. But now that I understand why it's important that Black Lives Matter and not saying all lives matter, I'm too embarrassed to bring it up. I mean, I'm engaged. I know it. I understand it now. I'm educated, but at the same time, I don't feel safe to bring it up because I might be shamed. I feel bad that I didn't get it right out of the gate. How am I learning and growing with all this vulnerability? How do you approach that?
That is such a good question. I think this is so important. This piece right here. So, we're asking middle managers to create a safe and supportive work environment for their team. So people can show up as their best selves and do their best work. Psychological safety. We have got to offer that for middle managers as well. Inclusion goes both ways. And I think a lot of times, think about the last 10 years. I mean, we've had these major social movements in our country. You think about gay marriage and Me Too and Black Lives Matter. The world and the workplace is becoming a lot different for white men. And you need to adapt and adjust to it. But to assume that you just have to do it or you just don't get it really isolates. And I think we lose a lot of white men in that process. When, this example you provided, I think the majority of men, they want to do better, but they don't know how to do better because they haven't had to. They could say and do what they wanted within reason, within the law. But how do I be more inclusive leader? Like that, you can just diving deeper on that question. I think that's where these programs, and I heard yesterday, we're going to develop an inclusive leadership journey. I think that's giving a safe space for leaders to kind of ask those questions is important. I've thought about having peer groups for middle managers. Maybe that already happens, but having a space where you can talk this through. I think you got to have trainings, and maybe do some role playing where you have, I talked about those moments that matter, play that out because that's not easy to do. So play that out, make your mistakes, do your failures. I think that's key too. But to assume that yes, in some ways, maybe have been the problem, but can be really a part of the solution. And so I think there's an opening and opportunity right now to reach out to middle management and help with the next phase of this work.
What do you tell a middle manager who's afraid of saying the wrong thing as they're trying to prepare for a lot of these conversations? Because it's one thing to say we have psychological safety. It's another to put your toe into that environment and going, is it? Can I? That sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, I think you've got to start with vulnerability. You're going to feel uncomfortable. And you've got to embrace that. To be in a situation, and I'll give you an example. So you mentioned George Floyd's killing in 2020, and we brought together I forget exactly, it was not as an organization, but I think a team or sub teams to just talk about it. And I was leading one of those conversations. So me as a white man, a number of people of color, women of color, and I was about 15 minutes into an hour conversation, and I just realized I was asking the wrong questions. I wasn't following up the right way. It was off. And I was not meeting that moment. And so I messaged a colleague in the room, a woman of color who I have a lot of respect for and a good relationship with. I said, "Can you please take over this conversation? Because I cannot, like, I felt like I was causing harm in that moment. And emotions were so raw back then. So then the world is lots happening in the world. So then we have what happened at the Capitol in January of 2021.
Mhm.
Here's something else that happens. You can't ignore that. You've got to talk about that with your team. And so what I did is I did some researching on, like, how do I approach this? How do I structure it? And so I had a checklist of what to do. I created space. I acknowledged that this is a difficult time. I affirmed how people were feeling, but I personalized it. How do I feel about this as, like, Jonathan Njus, like, outside of my title and everything else, offers support and encouragement, highlighted how we're going to respond as an organization. That worked a lot better than the last time. But, like, you're not going to get it right from the start. But if you can go there, you're going to become a better manager or leader or whatever. But you're also going to have better relationships with your team. They're going to trust you more. And that's going to help long term too, because I don't have it all figured out, probably never will. I'm going to make mistakes in the future, but they know, like, I have the best of intentions. Like, I've gotten it right a lot of times. So there's more, I think it gives you more of a runway to try things in the future. So anyway, that's an example from my life.
No, I like that a lot. It's very important to highlight personal vulnerability
Yeah,
because it brings relatability into it. It shows that I'm not just a mouthpiece for the organization.
100%.
I am a human being here that you may or may not be able to relate to, but at least I'm trying. And trying can provide a platform for trust. And you're like, I don't completely agree with you, but I see that you're working to this, that I might give you some soft environment in which to play, that your team might be a little bit more embracing of. I think it's really important. But there also is a lot of as a leader of a team, what kind of stories are you trying to tell then? Because, and as it pertains to the benefits of this, because there will be a lot of people that be like, I don't care, I just want to do my job. Why is DEI something I have to worry about? I don't hire anybody. I'm just here trying to do my work. I don't care what the person acts like beside me. In the fact that they're just more passive, not more proactive.
Yeah.
What are you? How do you as a leader engage your team? What stories are you telling to get them more interested, involved, engaged?
Yeah. I mean, I'll go there. I just want to follow up on one point from the
Please.
previous. I think for me to get better as a white man that has certain privileges, experiences, et cetera, I'm going to have to be in really close communication with people who have a different experience and background than I do.
Mhm.
So that relationship goes both ways, because I've learned a tremendous amount. I talked about my colleague who I turned that conversation over to, just talking with them. So I just want to highlight that point. You don't want white men, like, on their own trying to figure this out. You can do this. Listen, you got to do your own work, but you need to do this work in relationship with other people who are different from you. I just want to make
That's a good
that
point.
point. I mean, I think we've got to, like, it's not DEI. It's like, this is about it is about relationships at work, Russell. It is. How are we going to be together as a team? How are we going to relate to each other day to day? what are our values? What are our priorities? How are we going to hold each other accountable? How am I going to model that? That work environment, like I said earlier, safe and supported, is going to enable all of us to bring our best self and do our best work. Like that is something we all desire on a human level, as we were talking about earlier. I think the other thing too is to get people to share out about their, not so much their identity, but their background and experiences. We have a lot more in common than we don't. And I love those types of conversations when, and I think some of this is happening with ERGs, for example, like caregiving ERGs. Like, okay, I'm in a caregiving situation. I'm taking care of my parent or my grandparent on a full-time basis. There's commonality there. I'm a first generation worker in this environment. Like I need some support there. Parenting ERGs, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's some opportunities to build some bridges across identity. And that's something that I would focus on as well. I think the other thing too is like diversity is, and I said this earlier, is not just good for business, it's good for you. I mean, just like those, that's been one of the blessings of my career so far as I've worked in very diverse environments. And there's a richness to it, but you have more perspectives on a problem and on a project. You have more ideas on how to move forward and what to do better. And I've loved it. I mean, I didn't necessarily set out to have that. So, I mean, really like saying diversity is a good thing. It's a good thing for our team. It's a good thing for our organization. I think we just have to broaden the definition of diversity because it is a broad definition and we are leaving some people out. And so how do we bring more people in?
We've talked about it as it pertains to it's a program. We've talked about it as going to workshops and getting more educated. How do you operationalize this?
Yeah.
This should be a day-to-day thing. This isn't well, in the next month, we're going to be doing a workshop. And then in 6 months from now, we're going to do another one. Like this is day-to-day, every day. How does a middle manager operationalize this within the organization, especially if they're not getting some mandate from executive?
Yeah. I mean, I do think you need the inclusive leadership programs, and these can't be one-offs. I think that's where we would have implicit bias trainings in the field, and those just really didn't work. You need something that's longer term and what, like I said earlier, a safe and supportive space to have those peer groups because you need to be on a learning journey as a middle manager if you're just not where you need to be. One person I have a lot of respect for in the field is Joan Williams, who's wrote Biased Interrupters. And she talks about, and I think this is how you have to break it down. And we have a topical course on how to build the best teams. And really like that, I'll give you an example. So I was part of a panel last spring and we had some middle managers on it. And we never, like, you go to these panels at conferences and it's all DEI experts and DEI leaders, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really, very rarely have practitioners that are sitting up there talking about it. And it was a fascinating conversation. And this guy said, I don't know what you're talking about when you come with DEI this and DEI that. But when you tell me like, oh, this is a way that you can build the best team, then you've got me. Then, okay, then I know what you're talking about now. And so that's how to build the best team. So it starts with selecting your team. So, who's in the candidate pool, who's in the interview pool, like who has a fair shot at this job. You've got to have objective criteria when you're doing the hiring. It can't be about fit. And we know what that means. Like who does it fit for and who doesn't it fit for? So it's got to be about objective criteria. And then I think you've got to ask skill experience related questions, and you got to ask the same questions of everyone. So that's, selecting your team, managing your team, who gets the assignments and who doesn't in terms of the projects where you can really prove yourself. And then on the flip side of that, there's a term called office housework that Joan has used in her writing. It's obviously gonna be little housework, but like the administrative tasks, the emotional labor, those type of things, like who's getting that versus this more kind of glamour work. Like you've got like those are things as a leader, you got to figure that out. Who's getting the assignments and who isn't. So I think that's really important. I think when it comes to meetings, so this is when you're managing your team, who's talking and who isn't, who's talking over people, repeating. We see that a lot. And that's where you really have to interject and say, thanks for that. I think you did a really good job building on her point. I think that's part of it too. And then I mentioned this earlier, how you're evaluating your team. It has to be about performance, not potential. It has to be about skill, not personality. So I think that's key too. And then lastly, I would say, how can you promote your team? So not just mentorship, but sponsorship. So how am I amplifying achievements? How am I kind of boosting them? Okay, yeah, I think she'd be great for this, or he'd be great for that. And then defending them too, if and when need be. So my point there, and we can go deeper into any of these, is as an organization, the how you do it is extremely important. So the how to select your team, how to manage your team, how to evaluate your team, how to promote your team, diving deep in the how so that they're showing up the way that they should. That's going to make you a much more effective manager at the end of the day. And I think you're going to have the best team too. And that's what managers want.
And I love that you tap on something I really talk about a lot, which is communication. And you said right off the bat that I don't know what you're talking about, the diversity, the equity. I just want to make the best team. And that's a language exercise.
100%.
That is, instead of taking these words that now have a lot of baggage attached to them, that people will have their own preconceived notions about. And because that's how we want to communicate, that's not communication. Communication is not only what we say, it's what people hear and understand. So if we keep talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's not having the result or the buy-in that we want, we need to change the language for them to understand. And I love the idea of shifting it to teams because everybody gets that. Teams about productivity, teams about cohesion, teams about humanity, so I think the conversation needs to stop being about jamming DEI down our throat.
For sure.
Pertains to this is what we need to do and it's not going to change, versus adaptability and agility into what do people need to hear to really get these concepts, even if we can't use those words.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought up communication because that's
sorry. There's an
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to highlight this. There's an element to that with like speaking a language. DEI is one example, but there are a lot of acronyms thrown out and a lot of terms and phrases, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm talking with someone, like take that middle manager, if they don't know what I'm talking about, that's offensive. That's offensive to them. And there's a flip side of that. They may be thinking, oh, I get it, and they don't. And that is really going in the exact opposite direction in terms of relationships at the organization. And so that's where you really get some hardening, because I'm not being treated inclusively. But you aren't listening to me. So I just want to highlight that point, Russell, because I feel like that is underlying in a lot of ways. Like we really have to meet people where they're at and 100% like talk their language. And that's where I want to, like, another thing that how leaders can show up is like talking less, and like something I keep working on. Like, do I really need to say anything? Am I going to add anything? Just start with listening. And that's what a lot of organizations in our network have done, is like they just start listening to managers and workers and just asking questions. You'll figure out what you need to do.
It's really understanding that situational awareness. It's not self-awareness, absolutely, but situational awareness. To your point, paying attention to how things are working, listening, be an other outside to see what environment you're even working in to begin with,
Exactly.
because we don't know what problems exist. We can't solve problems we don't know about. So it's really understanding what we're even trying to tweak or not fix. Like maybe there's nothing to fix in certain areas, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up, Jonathan, because
Sure.
I'm feeling we could talk a lot.
Yeah.
Let's keep talking about this.
I've enjoyed it.
But if somebody's listening, a middle manager's listening, or somebody that has the influence over a middle manager, where would we start tomorrow? Where would we dip our toe in tomorrow to sort of get that path to engaging middle managers more in the DEI effort?
Yeah. I wrote an article about this in LinkedIn. I think with middle management, you can control some things, but you can't control a lot of things. That's on the one hand, you're in the middle of it all. So you have a lot of influence in terms of hiring and promotion and culture and all the things. Like for sure, there's power there. But you're also powerless in some ways because you're managing up, you're managing down. But you can choose who you're going to be. You have that control. Who am I going to be day in and day out with my team? One of the writers I love is Margaret Wheatley. And she has this quote, "Who do you choose to be for this time? Are you willing to use whatever power and influence you have to create islands of sanity that evoke and rely on our best human qualities to create, produce, and preserve?" We have that power as middle managers. We can choose how we're going to show up day to day. That's within our purview. And so that's like, I said this earlier, like focusing on yourself. Where do I need to learn? How do I need to improve? And your team is really going to appreciate that over time.
That is Jonathan Njus. He's the program lead for expanding equity and director of family economic security at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Thanks so much for being here, Jonathan.
Yeah, wonderful, Russell. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Take care.
And that brings us to a close for Relationships at Work, a leadership guide helping you build workplace connection, improve culture, and avoid blind spots. I'm Russell. Thank you so much once again for joining me. If you've loved these guest episodes, swell. I hope you've subscribed to the podcast, because we also do solo episodes that come out every Thursday. That means me talking about my insights, my experiences, things that you've shared with me that I want to share back to the community so that we can all sort of collectively learn and grow and be better leaders for it, which again is the whole goal here. We want to be better leaders because there's always an opportunity to do so. So again, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to my guest today, Jonathan Njus, for being a part of the show. And I look forward to talking to you again shortly, Thursday, or maybe next week with my next guest, who is phenomenal, but I don't want to spoil anything. All right, take care of yourself. Bye.